This is Tim with Empowered Change. And in our third episode of Stories and Lessons, I'm going to talk about my experience at basic training in the Air Force. I actually have had to re-record this episode a lot more often than the other ones. The basic experience for me, and I think for most people who have served, is a little bit more complex than a few weeks has any right to be. So for me, I'm going to focus in on the two main things that carried from basic to the rest of my life. So to start, my basic experience was a little unique in that I joined much later than most folks, and I had a bachelor's degree coming in. I got into the Air Force 3 months ahead of my 28th birthday, which is the cutoff for joining the enlisted corps. That meant that I was on average around 9 years older than the other trainees that were in basic training with me, 5 years older than most of the sergeants that were over me, and age peers with most of the mid-range officers that were around me. And I knew that being older in basic was going to be unique, but I didn't expect the age difference to be so profound with the people in charge of me. I went into basic with a bit more knowledge than I think a lot of people have. I was lucky enough to have several friends that had either joined up at a high school or sometime in a little later life, right? 2 of my friends started college and didn't decide to finish and instead went into the enlisted corps. And so I went to them for advice about this experience and to get some information about what to expect. And the 2 main themes that I was told was you don't want to stand out at basic. So if you can avoid it, stepping up for leadership is probably something to be avoided. The whole purpose of basic training is to learn how to be a uniform member, learn how to take direction, and get through the process as painlessly as possible. The other thing that they wanted me to remember was that basic training is designed from top to bottom, meaning that nothing that was going to happen to me was personal. The training instructors and cadre that were going to insult me and belittle me and stress me out weren't doing so for any personal attack on me. They were doing exactly what they were trained to do. And so the best way to survive that was to treat basic training kind of like a game. The other thing that I had in my pocket was at the end of my undergrad degree, I had decided to look into some of the military aspects because I knew I wasn't going to do politics at that point, and I thought that the military might be an option in the future. So I wrote a 10-page research paper on the different tactics and what is done by the training cadre at basic training to help build the airmen into who they wanted to be. So going into basic, I had a pretty good intellectual concept of what the experience could be like. And I think much like anybody who's been through anything will tell you, the intellectual experience can be helpful, but it certainly doesn't tell the whole picture. So I got to basic and was a little stunned to find that there were 2 other guys in my flight with bachelor's degrees. The Air Force tends to draw a little bit more in the way of educated recruits, so that wasn't all that uncommon. And it really ended up being a lucky experience for me because one of the guys went through basic with a really poor attitude and a miserable experience. He was probably in his early 20s and had a bachelor's degree. I think it was in English. But for whatever reason, he decided that he was smarter and better than everyone around him, to include the training cadre and sergeants. And this led to him just making a lot of people's lives difficult as far as his peers, probably made the training cadre quite angry, and he didn't learn anywhere near the amount of things he was supposed to. And as I watched this, I recognized that that could have very easily been me. I wasn't exactly not cocky in coming into the military older with my knowledge going in. And I decided pretty quickly in watching his experience that I wasn't going to make that same mistake. My sociology degree certainly didn't give me information that the sergeants that had been serving for 5 years had. And all of the folks that were in my basic flight with me had their own experiences and lives that I could probably benefit from learning from. So what I decided to do instead was figure out a way to leverage my education, knowledge, and age to help me and the unit. And there were two ways that I did that. The first was I got put in charge of cleaning the latrines, the bathroom basically. And I got put there as a punishment. I had purposely failed out of a job called chow runner. That's where you run around and announce the flight. Anytime the flight gets a meal, it puts you directly in front of the training cadre, which means you get a lot of attention from the sergeants in charge. And I knew I wanted to avoid that. So I really botched my first attempt at it, stuttering and messing up what I was supposed to say. And as a punishment, they put me in charge of the latrine. The irony of that is it was probably the best job for me in the unit. So in the Air Force, the bathroom is the only place that has a door. And that's significant because it's the only place where you're out of the line of sight from the training cadre and have a little bit of a buffer from the noise and chaos they generally bring on the unit. So what would happen is the training cadre would use bathroom cleaning detail as a punishment and a shaming exercise for anybody that wasn't meeting standard. And part of how they break you down is they give you tasks with insufficient instruction and then punish you for failing. And what that's meant to do is to stress you out and to get you to the point where you can think well under pressure. And it works. It certainly worked for me. I learned a lot about myself from those instances. But what ended up happening was that put me in a position to kind of mentor and ease some of that shame. So whenever guys would get sent into the latrine, they'd be very upset. They would kind of need some soothing afterwards. And I was able to do that, mostly by pointing out that we were in the only place with a door between us and the cadre. The next thing that I did was I recognized fairly quickly that a number of the guys in the unit didn't have any academic background or skill. In fact, 3 of the folks in my flight, as far as I could tell, really could barely read. And for 2 of them, it had nothing to do with a lack of intelligence, simply a lack of opportunity. One of them was from a fairly rural place where he didn't get to go to school and got his GED to join. Another guy was from an inner city area and had just really struggled to get through high school because of where he was. And I took it upon myself to help with my academic skill, right? I'd made it through a college degree. I knew how to study. And while the academic rigors of basic training aren't huge, if you haven't learned how to study before, learned how to memorize written material, it's a big challenge. So in most instances, flights in the Air Force that graduate have 2 or 3 folks that fail the academic portion of the testing the first time. Our flight didn't fail any of that. In addition to that, I got to learn a really valuable lesson about being humble. So one of those 2 guys was actually an astoundingly athletic guy. I forget which sport he played, but he knew a lot about physical fitness. He was really good at leading that aspect of basic. And for me, I was really out of shape when I showed up to basic. I was 28 years old, had worked office jobs for the last 5 years. I hadn't played rugby in 5 years, and I'd been eating like crap the whole time. So while all the 19-year-olds around me were doing sit-ups and crunches and getting 6-packs after a week, I was having to watch what I ate in the chow hall. I was really kind of struggling to meet standard. And that only got worse towards the end. In the last week of my basic training, I blew out my shoulder on an obstacle course and was told by a doctor that the injury could make it so that I could get out, or I could take a bunch of muscle relaxers and ibuprofen and just push through. And the young man that I helped pass his academic test was a huge amount of support through that and helping me get through that pain to meet the minimum standard required to get out of basic. So between that experience and the mentorship experience, I also got to learn how to function in an environment where you knew why you were being stressed, you knew how you were being stressed, but you also knew that it was important to be stressed. I kind of watched what the training cadre were doing as far as being intimidating, giving out tasks with no instruction. And early on, I realized that I could struggle against that experience. I could fight the emotional response that they wanted. I could demand more instruction. Generally, I could make myself a pain in the ass. And instead, I realized fairly quickly that I needed those lessons. Just like the 19-year-olds around me, I had never functioned on no sleep. I had very rarely in my life had to think quickly and clearly when I was scared. And the good news is the training instructors are really good at their job, so it wasn't hard to be scared of them when they get in your face. A lot of people will talk about how, my instructors never scared me. They weren't. I was too tough for that. The reality, I think, for most folks is the whole environment is designed to throw you off base. And the guys and gals that are in those uniforms and training cadre are trained specifically in how to stress you out and get in your face. So I don't want to make it sound like I was somehow choosing not to be brave. I was choosing not to try to be brave, I guess is the better way to put it. So I got to learn a lot. I got to learn about what I could do with no sleep and under stress. I think in our first 4 days at basic, they only let us sleep an hour or two at a time. I learned that the young men I was going to be serving with were going to be my family. My favorite thing about the armed services to this day is that it takes people from a country as diverse as ours, throws them together, and makes them function and care about each other. And at no point in my career was that more transparent than at basic. We had people from all over the country, from every walk of life, from every race, creed, and socioeconomic status. And that was going to be a theme for me. It was going to be a theme for my career. It was going to be part of the experience that I was going to cherish to this day. The other thing that I learned was how to own my experience as an older person in this background with a different set of education than most of the people around me. How to own that experience and education without degrading what I needed to learn and the people's experience and education around me, by kind of setting myself up as the unit's uncle, maybe even like a big brother, somebody you could go to that wasn't in a leadership position necessarily, but somebody that you knew you could talk to. The guys that were taking on those leadership positions would come to me for advice. They would listen to me when I said that what we were doing was wrong or right. And I got to be a comfort for the guys around me that were homesick, that were worried about whether they were going to get through the experience. And that, in turn, comforted me. It gave me a reason to be kind of the old man in the unit. And all of that was going to be important for me for the rest of my life. From that point forward, I've always been older than the people that I was working with. I joined the Air Force 10 years late. I went to grad school 10 years late, and I became a therapist 20 years late. Everybody that I perform with professionally is younger and usually brighter than me. But what I have that adds to our field and our experience is my story and the things that I've gone through and the people that I've seen and heard. So I guess in this very convoluted and complex experience, when telling you all about it, my hope is that you'll recognize what skills, knowledge, and experience that you have and figure out a way to leverage that while still being able to learn from the folks around you. I don't know if that is a hard lesson for most people, but it was a hard one for me, and it's the one that has carried me the furthest in my life. This is Tim Winnicky with Empower Change. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.